the oldest playbook in the book. Pick some vulnerable group that doesn't sound like quote unquote you, and put it on them. And we got to have a counter story.
And it's obviously a resilient message, unfortunately, because there is data to suggest that like more and more Americans are on board with heinous.
Hey y'all, what's up? Thanks for setting this up, man.
Of course. We are a week out from the election, and there's been a lot that has happened in the past.
Saying that gave me some feelings.
I know.
Here it comes. So,
I mean, I want to talk to you about a bunch of different things, specifically about Texas Latino outreach from the GOP. Well, there was a lot that we didn't get to talk about when you came on the broadcast when I was at the DNC. I'm going to turn your audio up a little bit too, I think. Wait, let's see. Can you give me another? Can you say some stuff? Oh, it's yeah, you're muted. I don't know why. You might have accidentally muted yourself.
All right.
Oh, you're back. Okay. Oh, you're muted. Okay, you're back. Nope, you're muted again.
Okay, I think I'm in, right? This is it?
Yes.
This is it?
Yes.
Good.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to read out your Google Doc talking points real quick to introduce you. A native Texan, son of Mexican immigrants, and community organizer Greg Casar serves as the U.S. Congressman for Texas 35, which includes the I-35 corridor from East Austin to Hays County to the west side of San Antonio. A progressive Democrat, Casar is known for his work on federal heat protections, the Connect the Grid Act, housing immigration reform, and workers' rights. In just 2 years in Congress, he has delivered more than $8 million directly back to the constituents in the district through VA benefits, back pay, or tax refunds. Is that a good enough?
You have fun saying that?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, look, I think you're dope. Everybody knows that already. You were fantastic. I recently saw. Let me see if I can find this clip really quickly. I recently saw you talking specifically about how like right-wing border policies, white nativist border policies actually end up helping the cartel quite a bit. I think it was a congressional hearing where I heard you speak on this matter, and I think it was really brilliant. If you don't mind, we can just talk over it instead of just like replaying that video. But you said some things about how a lot of our border policies end up benefiting the cartel quite a bit.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you were like a cartel leader and wanted to write out a set of policies, like a lot of Texas Republican policies would be the most pro-cartel policies that you could come up with. And I don't just say it tongue in cheek, I say it really seriously. Just to viewers at home, I mean, if we talk about drug policy, if we talk about immigration policy, if you talk about gun policy, the Republican policies on this, and frankly, some of the worst Democratic policies, but heavily the Republican policies, are really in cartel's favor on these issues. So if we talk about guns, for example, especially as progressives try to be labeled as not being tough on violence, I mean, the majority of guns that are recovered from cartels in Mexico are U.S. sourced guns. And the majority of those come from Texas, where the laws recently have been updated that you don't need a license to get a firearm. You can buy a weapon of war and rifle starting at age 18. And then those guns are easily smuggled into Mexico. So those Texas Republican gun policies are about as pro-cartel of a gun policy as you can get. Same thing on migration. If you push migration into the underground market, that is, you restrict legal forms of migration, then cartels are the option that people pay for. They don't want to do that. They don't want to risk their lives. They don't want to pay criminal organizations to be able to save their lives. But if you're going to save your life and your kids' lives, that's what people are going to do. So that Republicans, by killing legal migration options, have created this underground market. On drug policy, same thing. When you talk about defunding public health and addiction services for people, then yeah, you're helping create the underground market that cartels exploit. So I think the Democratic Party should be instead of leaning into trying to be Republican light to be tough on things like cartels, let's call out the actual truth, which is that Republican policy is pro-cartel policy.
Yeah, that's a really good way of framing this issue on partisan lines, I think. and it's something that I hope the Democrats pay attention to and potentially also repeat. It does seem like on this election cycle, however, the Democrats have definitely, since last October of 2023, when Biden unveiled the right-wing border package that was written by one of the most conservative senators from Oklahoma, the Democrats have genuinely tried to either avoid talking about immigration at all, or in their worst moments, chosen to take a rather reactionary stance. Now, the problem with this is that this kind of sentiment is not born out of any real issue. I've never heard from a single Republican a conclusive reason, a real reason as to why migration into this country constitutes any sort of threat whatsoever. No economic problems, or the economic problems that exist are directly born out of the two-tier immigration structure that we currently have, that is by design, that is created so that there is a permanent underclass that is easier to exploit. And not only that, but also no national security threat whatsoever. There's no empirical evidence to suggest, and only empirical evidence to prove that undocumented migrants actually are responsible for less crime per capita than natural-born U.S. citizens. So it's very frustrating that we don't get to hear this perspective at all from the Democratic Party in general.
I mean, it is core. It's the core political issue that's deciding this election right now.
Yeah,
and it's worse than frustrating. And part of it, you described how too often Democrats have run away from the issue, and I describe it as when we see a fire, we've got to run at the fire. But this is a fire where the arsonists, every time they see a firefighter, they say, "Look how that firefighter started that fire." Because it's those right wingers that are making the so-called problem worse. And you've described that actually undocumented immigrants are the ones saving Social Security by paying into that system and never being able to pull out of it, adding trillions of dollars to our economy, all of that. But I do think also, coming from Texas, we do want to try to address, well, what is it that people are feeling? Why does this stick out as an issue? Because voters are smart, and this is an issue that people raise not for no reason. And I think of a couple of things. One is they see disorder on their TV screens, and people don't like to see things be disorderly. They want to see a powerful country like us run things well. And what's interesting is that actually the legal migration process that we are trying to expand and modernize, that isn't shown on TV, and that doesn't concern people. And so when we have asylum seekers that we actually accept and process through a center and make sure they get a court date and make sure they get reunited with their family and it runs smooth, then, and there's enough staffing and the process is good, everybody's good with that. But when people do the kinds of things, like you said, militarize the border, make it so that people can't apply, make it so that there's limited slots, then you got people in tents, you got people waiting in line, and then that gets exploited. So that's issue one. And then the second one is economics and cultural issues where people feel uneasy. And a lot of Americans feel uneasy for a huge number of reasons. I'm sure tons of people watching right now feel uneasy about a lot of stuff. Prices have gone up, storms are crazy, life is crazy, and it doesn't feel like things are right. And Republicans have sent a consistent message led by Trump that is, you know what, who the villain in this story is, and pick a vulnerable group. And the main one they've picked is immigrants. Yeah. And they've told that consistently. And Democrats need to have a consistent message that says, hey, if you feel like something's wrong, how about Wall Street? How about these big venture capital firms that are consolidating everything and jacking up prices? How about the politicians that serve them? But we haven't told that consistent message. You've heard more of a dispersed message at best. And so, yeah, so at least those two things, a disorderly process that's purposefully been made disorderly, and a clear story being told by the Republicans, the oldest playbook in the book, pick some vulnerable group that doesn't sound like, quote unquote, you, and put it on them. And we got to have a counter story.
And it's obviously a resilient message, unfortunately, because there is data to suggest that like more and more Americans are on board with heinous policy that is truly harmful to tens of millions of Americans. Donald Trump regularly lies and claims that hundreds of thousands of Americans are being murdered by undocumented migrants. That is an abject lie. The real data on that is, I believe, 26 in the fiscal year of 2024, 26 homicides and instances of manslaughter so far, which is such a massive disparity. Like, the truth is so different than what the way that Donald Trump presents it. He then tries to package that up if people actually ask follow-up questions on it, which many people never do, because I feel like the media is also kind of dropping the ball here in communicating the truth. But when asked about it, at least like some smarter Republicans will claim, oh, it's fentanyl deaths. Okay, how does fentanyl actually get over the border? Well, if you look at the actual truth, if you look at the Department of Homeland Security's own data, if you look at the Customs and Border Patrol's own data, chemical compounds necessary to create fentanyl are actually apprehended at the border in regular ports of entry. Regular points of entry, like regular border checks. And 90% of the people that are trafficking the drugs are American citizens. They're not undocumented migrants. It would be a logistical...
And it makes sense why they would be.
Yeah, it would be a logistical nightmare.
Cross with a passport. Yeah. The Venezuelan mom escaping with her kid, the thing in her backpack is like just a couple sets of clothes and the little bit of money they've got. That's what they've got.
Yeah.
But they don't want to tell that story. But I think the place that the Democratic Party needs to beef up, and we're trying to get the message out now, but it feels last minute, is why is it that they're telling that lie, right? Because it's hard to imagine that people with so much power, go out and tell the lies constantly that you've said that they tell. So they're like, why haven't I heard that? It's because they want to cover for their real agenda, which is helping Elon Musk write off more business expenses, helping, a billionaire get a tax cut. But that doesn't sound as popular. So they go off saying that it's immigrants that are trafficking the fentanyl. When the truth is that 93% or something like that are legal residents and U.S. citizens.
Yeah, I want to ask you, because we have a limited amount of time here, I think, or they said only like 30 minutes. But I wanted to ask you about the state of the election, specifically in Texas. Now, Kamala Harris recently was in Texas with this massive Beyonce rally that happened. I wanted to ask you specifically about like what you think Colin Allred's chances are. I do hope he unseats Ted Cruz. I mean, is there a lot of resentment in Texas towards Cancun Cruz, a person who like very openly did the classic trope of like the shitty politician where he escaped his own constituents and his own problems, something that you've actually unironically advocated against, specifically with restoring the grid or bringing Texas's energy grid back into the national energy grid, something that you authored, the Connect the Grid Act, plays a role in this as well. So are there a lot of Republicans that might not vote for Kamala Harris, but will at the very least vote against Ted Cruz?
Yes, there will be a chunk of people that even no matter, they are not Democrats, but they just cannot stand Ted Cruz. I mean, Ted Cruz brings the left and right days with his unlikability. But I think the real story here, I hope Colin wins. We're working hard on his race. People throughout the state are working hard on this. But the fact that this is this close to the election, and that everybody's talking about it here in this last month, I think the real story is that Ted Cruz has been vulnerable this entire time.
Yeah.
And that Texas has been a swing state these last 6 years because Beto O'Rourke kept Ted Cruz from even getting to 51% of the vote. And folks sometimes don't remember like what that moment was like 6 years ago in Texas. It was pretty electric and really close. And so my message to people is that, of course, if Colin Allred wins, it changes electoral politics, not just in Texas, but for the country for a generation. If, which I hope he doesn't, but if he doesn't, but it's close, we can't make the same mistake across the country that was made 6 years ago, where folks kind of let it go, said it was a lost race, and then let it go, and then suddenly start talking about it again here in the last couple of months of the election. Because you've got to get people engaged throughout those 6 years. Because while some small number of Republicans or some significant number of Republicans will cross over, in Texas there are millions of people that we just don't engage with and don't talk with at all,
Yes.
who could completely change the game. And Ted Cruz would be a thing of the past if over the last 6 years those people
Yeah.
had been adequately talked to.
So can we talk about the Latino vote in Texas a little
Yeah,
bit? Because this is
let's do it.
something that I have tracked for quite some time. Personally, I've always thought that it was very interesting that Latino voters, specifically in Texas, but like Latino voters outside of like the diaspora Cuban vote or diaspora Venezuelan voters, like the voters in Florida, Latino voters in Florida are a little bit different than Latino voters in the rest of the country. Time and time again have consistently in polls said that they want more social safety nets across every demographic, which is really interesting because in every other group, when polled on more government spending and more government programs, more social safety nets, the older you get, usually the less likely older voters are to say that they want that sort of thing. Latino voters are different, however. While some may have the same social conservatism demonstrated in the older demographics across the board, when it comes to economic policies, Latino voters are very progressive, at least as far as I have seen in the data. Now, looking at that reality, the lack of infrastructure within the Democratic Party to actually fight these battles on the ground in Texas, like the lack of funds as seeing Texas not as like a potential swing state, as you just said, but instead just like, it's going to be red no matter what we do. And refusing to actually dump more money into these races. I fear that the Democratic Party's GOP outreach, like its Latino outreach, has basically become nationalized, where in the absence of the Democratic Party in the absence of the Democratic Party door knocking and coming out and saying like, no, here's what we are going to offer you. We know that you want a better social safety nets. We're going to do that. We're going to fight for that. In the absence of that happening, I feel like the Republican Party, especially for Latino outreach, has made social conservatism the major priority, right? And I feel like there are a lot of people that you could shake away in every demographic, in every age group, specifically among Latino outreach in Texas, which is very important, very significant. What do you have to say to that? Do you feel like there's any truth to what I'm saying? Are the polls lying?
No, there's a lot to that. Here, I'll tell you this: that tactic of right-wing social policy definitely activates a core group of people, and then there's the Democratic core voters that a lot of them got organized up through the Chicano movement here back in the day. And then there's the huge untapped number of Latinos. I mean, we're almost a 40% Latino state.
Yeah.
Huge numbers of people that we just don't talk to and are just left. And that economic policy messaging could be so powerful, both messaging wise and organizing wise, to transform the state. 40 electoral college votes would not just determine this presidential election, generation of presidential elections. And my experience with Latino voters and people in Texas, like you said, somewhat different than in other states, is when I was on city council, we had a big mobile home park that got bought by private equity. They wanted to throw everybody out, but they were organized as hell. They fought back. And the elder from the community that kind of knew everybody, he was mayor of his town in northern Mexico, and he was head of his railroad workers union. Right? We had another apartment building where they stood up and fought back to get basic things like air conditioning and taking care of the seniors in the building. And the head folks there, they were heads of some of their immigrants' rights groups up and down Central America and in Mexico. So a lot of time you had people that are in these, they're working construction, they're framers, they're carpenters, but they have a history in Texas and in Latin America of populist economic based organizing and taking care of each other. So that message can connect. But when all you're being fed on your phone and on your TV screen is just the culture war being fought, that just oftentimes isn't going to move people. And people more often than not will say, well, whoever I vote for, whatever happens, the same kind of thing happens. And without a Democratic Party that shows short-term wins to people and then can remind them of those wins, hard to bring them in.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so how do we prove this to the Democratic establishment? I feel like I mean the fact that you have won your race is I think slowly but surely moving in the right direction. But how do we get the Democratic Party on board with this kind of messaging to hyper focus on issues that people do actually care about, like to get them on board with the idea that, like, yeah, if you go out to people and you say, I see where you're hurting, I'm going to do something about it, I'm going to fix it. Housing is an issue for you. I'm going to create more opportunities for affordable housing. Maybe even some actual federal funds will be dished out for massive housing projects that we will create with federal funding. Like, how do we do that? How do we get the Democrats to be on board with that?
I think we have to pair our actual policy wins, like you said, with a strong and clear political message. And I think that does require Democrats to unpair ourselves from some of those billionaire interests so that we can say, hey, we're going to set up tax policy where if you make under $400,000 a year, we're going to help you out. People that make over $400,000 a year, they're going to pay more. Clear and make it clean and simple. And then for there to be the investment in Texas long term to actually go and talk to all those voters at their doors so that we don't have to just rely on Elon Musk's app. But the last thing that I'll say is it's not like the Republicans are going to take this line down and just let it happen. I just spent a week in Nevada talking with undecided Latino voters, especially, Latino men. And it's a real battleground state where they have that kind of electoral infrastructure and they have local seats and they have people knocking on folks' doors. And even there, even still, where I was like, hey, real talk, talking to some iron workers, sheet metal workers that said they voted Obama, they voted for both Clintons. This time they don't know. Maybe they vote for Trump. They bring up, they have had this message that the Democratic Party isn't focused on them. Even if their congressperson has been focused on them, even if we did deliver the infrastructure bills that have created the construction jobs they're working on. So how does that propaganda break through? And I think we're going to have this challenge, and it's an important one that we have to face down, where people like Greg Abbott, my governor, they pick on LGBTQ youth. And do you decide you're not going to stand up for LGBTQ youth because you don't want a news story that distracts from the economic issues? No, I mean, you got to do the right thing and stand up for, trans young people have rights. We should be able to stand up for civil rights.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, we don't want this distraction from the core economic issues that some of these disaffected voters care about. And I think that takes that pairing of the issues and saying, why is it that this guy with all this power is picking on trans middle schoolers? Isn't that sick? And maybe he's doing it because he's trying to take money out of your pocket and not have you notice. And I think it's that connection, that piece that we have to do, because we can't just tell people, hey, don't worry about what you see on TV. We have to make that connection for folks.
Absolutely. I think that we need fighters in the Democratic Party. This is something that I've been screaming about for years and years and years. Not people who cave and capitulate the right-wing framing on the issues because they see a couple polls that scare them and think that, like, if we submit to right-wing framing on this stuff, that maybe it'll be easier for us to win elections, but instead fight back, push back on it. I think Tim Walz does a pretty good job, I would say, in terms of like defending trans rights. I think that the Republicans are weird. Messaging was I guess maybe it was really successful, at least from my perspective, because like it's something that I've also said for quite a bit. But I hope that there are more fighters in the Democratic Party because I've never seen a Republican cave to liberal values or liberal issues or left-wing framing on anything, even if it is the actual reality of the matter. And in many instances, it is the reality, right? Like the liberal framing is the correct position in many of these circumstances.
And I think that's a critical part of why Donald Trump's defeat is going to be so important. We need to be able to repudiate that kind of just immigrant bashing, vulnerable people bashing every step of the way. And then with Harris and Walz in the White House, create that new frame for the Democratic Party. Because if Kamala Harris wins, and I'm urging everybody watching to go and vote now that's early voting most places, if she wins, it'll likely be close. And in that close election, we got to say we can't have cut it this close again. We've got to rebuild the working class multiracial majority that can deliver real wins. And the only way to do that, I think, is to not keep on running that old playbook where you're a Republican light on something like immigration. I just don't think that has worked. And I'll be there making sure that if and when I really, really hope she wins, that it's not like people say that the Republican light thing worked. I mean, nobody can say that that's been the way to do immigration or anything else.
So, question for you. I don't know if this is this is my only gotcha for you.
Okay, I'm ready. Well, maybe it's not a real gotcha if you're letting me know it's coming.
Okay, well, it's a little bit of a gotcha. There is an article in the Austin American Statesman talking about you potentially vying for a position of leadership beyond the one that you currently hold in the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Is this something that you are interested in, leading the
Progressive Caucus? Yeah. So there's it's an internal election. Pramila Jayapal has been our chair for these last few terms. She's termed out, and so I've submitted my name, and progressives will decide. We're this group of over 90 progressive members of Congress, hopefully to use our collective power to sort of bring the Democratic Party back to that populist, popular, and principled place, and want to help with that kind of no matter what our members decide.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm very excited at the prospect of such a thing happening. I think that would be wonderful. Just, what would you?
Thank you, man. If you gotta come at me with a harder gotcha question next time.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, here I'll follow up on it.
Oh no, I'm
what are some of the things that you could do potentially as the leader of the Progressive Caucus? Like, what are the things that the leader of the Progressive Caucus could do for a lot of the uninitiated in my community that might not fully understand what this is?
Yeah. So 435 members of Congress. You either have a Democratic majority or Republican majority. Hope that we have a Democratic majority with Democratic speaker, and the Progressive Caucus is almost half of the Democrats. It's a membership-based organization, and so you have to say you sign up for certain progressive priorities, and then you get to vote. And as the chair, you don't just get to say, "Here's what we're doing." You got to work with your members to come up with a strategy and a plan. And I hope that we can have a strategic progressive caucus that can get the kind of progressive legislation that we want on a variety of issues. But I'll talk about one here for everybody listening. The Trump tax scam is expiring. This was the Trump tax plan or cuts that really overwhelmingly went to the biggest corporations and the top 1%. Very, very little to the everyday American.
It's expiring for some.
Some, the big corporate stuff, some of the corporate stuff doesn't fully expire.
The corporate tax rate doesn't expire, and I believe that the top marginal tax rate does not expire either, if I'm not mistaken.
But a big part of it does. And requires a vote of Congress. So again, I'm not even talking about it as being chair or not chair, because that would get decided after the election. But even just as a Progressive Caucus member, we could bring together many of our members to say, we're not going to just let there be a vote to keep extending tax cuts for the top 1% and screwing everybody else over. And especially if the Democrats control the House, not just the Progressive Caucus, we could go and say our job is to go do outreach to the entire Democratic Caucus to say, you know what, we're just going to let these things expire and have the top 1% start paying a little bit close to their fair share in taxes. And if there's, say, Republican senators or Republican Senate or some sort of problem on the other side, I would say, if you want to play ball and we want to end half of child poverty or end homelessness as we know it in American cities, you can come and negotiate with us. We're not really going to be here for giving away tax breaks to the rich, but come tell us what you want to do for working class people and show us your true colors instead of sort of letting somebody else run the show, because we know that on this issue of making things more affordable for working class and middle class people and taxing the rich, that actually the majority of the American people are with us. I'm not a person anymore that says the majority of the American people are with us on every progressive issue. I mean, there's places we got to do persuasion, places we got to talk to people. But on this issue of taxes, where we've got tons of people watching this that are paying a way higher tax rate than freaking Bezos and Musk, this is a place where I think we could bring together progressives as a block, not just a few of our best and brightest voices, but as a block to kind of rebrand progressivism as something that is popular and populist and principled and for you, whether you're interested in politics or not. Your day-to-day life and how much money you've got, politics has to do with that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Is there anything I might have missed that you wanna speak on before I let you go?
It's good to be on, and I'm happy to be back. I just want to remind everybody just how important the vote is. I know that things can be difficult. I know it feels like sometimes you're just a drop in the bucket out there, but people fought and died for this right for a reason, and it's part of one part of the process. So get out there and do it, and keep on pushing on your elected officials to be accountable and do the right thing.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg.
See ya.
All right, bye. That was Congressperson Greg Casar, ladies and gentlemen. He's dope. He's awesome. Yeah. Austin vindicated. Texas is a swing state. I have talked about harm reduction and lesser evil voting and things of that nature. But beyond that, I really, really, really do want Ted Cruz not to be a senator. I mean, just think about it. Just think about Ted Cruz out of Congress for a second. Like, I'm not even going to fucking tell you, go out and vote for Kamala if you live in the state of Texas. Okay? I've like, vote with your conscience. Of course, I will tell you never to vote for Donald Trump. But think about how sick it would be to make sure that Ted Cruz does not